Okay, perfect. All right, everybody, welcome back to the third episode of KTCG, keeping the conversation going. We have a nice episode for you today. We're talking about mental health and how it can be wealthy in our lives. And so we're going to have an intimate conversation today. As you can see, it's only three people. And so Jamise will be sharing her thoughts as well. So she's going to be a participant in this podcast today. And I'll be the moderator. So, for the first question, for the record, how long have each of you been going to therapy? Jamise, you can start.
So I started therapy this year, around, I would say end of June, beginning of July. I just had a lot more time on my hands and it just worked with my schedule at that time. And so I've been going, I would say I've been meeting with my therapist probably every 2 weeks. Just fits my schedule. And I did take a pause right now just to get my new job back on track, just to see what I can do with it. But I will be going back every 2 weeks. And I still kind of reach out to her and text and things of that nature.
How about you, Ramon?
Yeah, I've been in and out since. So I started in 2017. I did like 2 sessions with a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Then I stopped, and then the year after, I've been in and out with like there's 4 different therapists.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, you can think about it as like dating in a sense,
Yeah.
you know. And the person I'm with now is really dope. And we meet every 2 weeks.
Mhm. Oh, okay. Nice,
Yeah.
nice. We can move on to the next question. That was a nice and quick one. What was your first impression of therapy? Did you have a positive or negative perspective? And i.e., was therapy being for rich people or crazy people? Those type of thoughts you can share. And Ramon, you can go first this time.
Yeah. Let me think about that. So, I mean, I just like anyone else, right, who grew up in the United States. There's a certain image of therapy, and like the stigma of what it means to be a client, and going to therapy. So I think going into it, I was thinking like, I wonder what my parents would think. I wonder what my friends would think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, I was worried about what I'll think about myself, right? Like,
Yeah.
would I regret doing this? Would I look at myself differently? Like, would I look at myself as weak? For example. Um, and no, I got in, and it was amazing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I thought so. What I was worried about the most was going in and thinking that once I start sharing, that
Yeah.
the therapist will dig deep into my unconscious and everything will come out and that it'll be uncontrollable,
Yeah.
and all the emotions are pouring out. No, but it wasn't like that, right? It was more interesting than anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just learning about yourself. You know she was asking very critical questions I never asked myself, questions that others have never asked me.
Mm-hmm.
I started connecting certain dots.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, it was only 2 sessions, so I can't imagine what it would have been like if I continued with her. But the work continued with other therapists though. So yeah, and overall, it was a good experience. It was better than what I anticipated, I guess you could say.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Jamise.
Yeah. It was a difficult question to think about for a second. I guess when I initially thought about it, yes, I did think it was for crazy people, because a lot of the just conversations around it was there's something wrong with your mind, right? Or you're not normal, whatever normal is anymore, or whatever it was to begin with. And I think a big part of that was one, I was just continuously asking myself. I was asking other people, and there's a big question that I asked, and I'm like, am I the only one going through this? And I think that's what made me immediately like go into therapy. But I think my family also had an impact on it, because I remember telling my mom before, like, all the things that I would think about. And she would kind of tell me, like, you know, you're going to be fine. You're okay. And then mentioning therapy in a Black household is like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're mentally fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You just need to chill and do what you need to do, and you'll get over it. And I think I didn't have a negative impact on therapy. Like, it wasn't that it was something wrong to go to, or that it was something that would be like, it's just not something like, at this point in my life, I'm like, everyone should have therapy. It should just be a given right. It should be in your medical insurance. Because it's just the simple fact that, like, you don't know what trauma or what grief or what just anything that anyone is dealing with. And so at this point, I'm just like, there's a huge positive outlook on it. And as you know, from like my first session, I explained it to you and everything. Like, she was just amazing, right? She kind of delved into all of the questions that I know for a fact I didn't want to ask myself, or questions that I kind of like pushed in the back front of my head and tried to ignore. And it gets you out of the zone that you think you don't want to be in. And I remember having my first session and I was like, am I built for this? So there's also the conversation of like, am I built for therapy? And it was hard. It was a difficult like question to ask myself, but it's like, it's either I want to get better, or I just want to just be suffering for as long as I have to. So it definitely it was a negative outlook, obviously, just to be thinking that I'm crazy. But then it kind of got better over time, just knowing the people that I have in my circle.
Yeah. What do you mean by am I built for this? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, he's like, that's interesting. Yeah, I think what it was that, so like, you know, they give you kind of like homework, or the questions that they're asking you are pushing you into a state of mind that are like, you purposely did not put yourself into that state, right? You purposely held it back. You purposely did not address it. And so I guess it was me having either my escapism or me pushing back from actually diving into those serious things that are going to make me get better. And so that's where it became like, am I built to just even address these situations? Am I strong enough, or am I just weak to the point where like, I really do not want to touch this surface. I just want to stick to the surface level of this conversation. Like, please don't let me dive deep into it. And then I realized like that deepness has to happen. It's incredibly important.
Yeah. Or like, am I ready now to handle this? Yeah, that's a big one. And honestly, just to validate that, there are certain trauma victims, it's not best to jump right into it, right? Like, you have to work with the client, and work around the issue, to help them feel resilient enough, to then slowly get into the trauma and do the trauma work. And sometimes that could take over a year. So I think it's client dependent. So nah, I think that's a normal question to ask yourself for sure. Yeah, I'll keep it there.
Appreciate that.
I have a side question. Because Ramon, you mentioned that therapy was like dating before we started recording. Do you feel as if, this is a question for both of you, do you feel as if your therapist had to match your ethnic background in order to be fully relatable, or could it just been like an Asian person or a white person?
Yeah. Okay. So that's such an important question. And I don't think there is a perfect answer to that. So I'll start with what the research says, right? Research says that it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the therapist is multiculturally minded, right, and sensitive to diversity, diversity issues, systemic issues. That they're not colorblind, I guess you could say, right? That's highly important, right? So it doesn't matter. So according to the research, that's what it says. However, in practice, I've come across certain therapists that didn't really get it, right? And the ones who did kind of get it, or guess who, So yeah, I can only speak from my experience, right? So I've had therapists who, like, I literally walked in to the therapy room and they were like, as you can see, I value diversity very much and pointing at artifacts they collected from Africa and China. And I'm sitting there like, what in the world? What is happening right now? Like, is this? I'm looking around for the camera. Like, it has to be a joke. And yeah, immediately that was the first session, and I'm thinking like, okay, I don't know if I could trust this person, right? I don't know if they're gonna get it. And eventually, there was a mismatch, right? And I realized it, and I moved on. But then I also went to another therapist who, there was an overemphasis on our identities, right? Like, like this therapist overassumed too much because I was Latino, because she was also Latina, right? And she was a great therapist. The problem was that it was too much, and I didn't stop. Went to her because because of that. I generally did feel better after going through it, and other contexts as well. Context is important. But looking back, I remember feeling like I wish I would have addressed that with the therapist. So yeah, and then the last one, then someone else I went to, whole bunch of microaggressions during therapy.
What?
Like, yeah,
Can
dude,
you give a little bit like an example if you can share or not?
Sure, I'll give one example. Sure. I was talking about, ironically, about a microaggression.
Yeah.
And she accused me of being the racist for assuming that the microaggressors were being racist just because of the color of their skin. So I understand the angle that she was coming from, right? I thought and if I were to word it better in her own words, for her, I think what she was trying to imply was that ultimately what I'm dealing with is internalized racism, right? Right. I think at the heart of my issue, right? At the heart of the issue is really systemic, right? But let's put that to the side for a second. The ways that the systemic issues were affecting me internally was manifesting my relationships also, right? It was a two-way street, right? If she were to word it that way, I think I would have been a lot more understanding. It would have, the words would have been internalized a bit better. But at the moment, I was legit like stuck. I was like, what the fuck? What am I supposed to say to that? I hope I can curse. All right, cool, because I curse a lot. Yeah, so it was I've addressed it like the session after with her, and she apologized and everything. So it wasn't the end of the world, but I remember thinking like, man, like I feel like I've done a lot of work in terms of my internalized racism. So I couldn't imagine somebody who's just starting to come into the understanding of race, right? And working with her and dealing with that, or someone else, or another therapist working with a client who's not really, racially inclined, I guess you could say, and the impact that would have had, right? Just accepting that, like, oh, actually, you're right. It is my fault, right? And the impact that has. So yeah, I'm grateful that I was in a position to like question it and to challenge it. But yeah, my current therapist, she's a woman of color. She is white passing though, but she understands, and it's not so much that she is a woman of color. I think that helps me unconsciously. So I'm not going to just completely deny that. But what I'm aware of is that she asked me very critical questions early on about my identity and how that impacted my current issues, which helped me understand like, okay, yeah, this person gets it, and it was consistent throughout how my identity is as not just a man, but a man of color, and how that connects, and intertwines itself. And they consistent. I just kept thinking, yeah, she gets it, and she gets me, right? So yeah, so long story short, just to answer your question, it matters, but I think what matters more is that the therapist is conscious, aware, understands how the system of oppression impacts current issues, but also has an awareness of how you're an individual, right? I'm not just a Latino, right? I'm not just a Dominican. Like I'm complicated, right? Like I've so many identities, right? Merge into one. Just it's a balance. It's a balancing act.
A balance. Oh, thank you. Gemise?
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, Ramon. Like, you just really gave me the point. Basically, that's what I was going to say, that there's just so many factors to take into account. This is my first therapist, and I was lucky enough, me and her share the same background. She is a Caribbean, I'm a Caribbean, and she didn't heavily rely on, like, when she first initially asked me questions, she asked me a bunch of questions, right? Like, how, like, just give me a synopsis or a background about you, right? And to see what I just mentioned. I spoke a lot about work, obviously. And she did ask me about my identity. She asked me about my family. Like, what, am I a middle child? Am I the last child? Like, there were questions about that as well. And then there was socioeconomic conversation. So she asked a lot of, like, just identity questions, right? There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle beside me just being Black. And when she does speak to me, there is a lot of, like, oh, this is why you're acting this is why this is happening, because of your background, your race. And then there's the research, right? There's, like, this is what the research says. So I think that balance is very important. And then another thing that I just wanted to mention was that, I guess I would say that it makes me feel comfortable knowing that she is Black. I just feel more comfortable sharing with her. And it's true. It's real. That's just how it is. It just makes you feel comfortable, especially it being my first time. I just feel much safer in a space to know that I'm sharing my most deepest, darkest things that I don't share with a lot of people to someone that they understand, right? And we actually shared kind of like the same experiences, right? She understands what I'm going through on a personal level too, because this is what she has dealt with before in her life. And I think that is super important, because it's not just, I don't know, I love being relatable. I like emotion. I like making sure that someone is truly understanding where I'm coming from, because a lot of time you do get backlash that, like, your feelings don't matter, or it's like no one is understanding what you're saying. And yeah, sometimes there is that hard conversation of, like, this is how you're actually acting. Like, you don't realize it yet, but this is what it actually is. But I do feel comfortable just talking to her. And I don't know, maybe I'll move on to someone else to see, but I think it's like how Ramon mentioned, just, I would be very awkward walking into a room and someone's like, oh yeah, I'm so built on diversity. These are all the different things that you can put into, and it's like, no, you're just showboating right now. I don't need you to tell me that. I need you to show me that that's what you are, right? It's a lot of, like, just fluff. Like, stop using the word just because it just makes you feel good, or you think someone's just gonna know, oh yeah, they really care about me. No, right. It does not work that way.
Yeah. I think that was an extreme version. I think what we may see more common now is, like, fluff words, like academic words thrown in to make you feel like, oh, this person gets it. Like, they use the term, like, intersectionality, right? And, systemic racism is, it's very important to understand. It's like, okay, I know you know the words, right? I don't care.
Exactly.
I need to know that you really get it and how it plays into my life, right?
Yep.
Into the lives of people.
Definitely true.
Some powerful answers there. That was good. We can move on to the third question, which is, how did people with your similar ethnic background perceive therapy and mental health? And was prayer or religion ever brought up as an alternative? Gemise, you go first this time.
This is an interesting question. I think when I first, my family's not religious, but my mom did try, like, we did go to church a few times when I was younger, and my grandparents, her parents and stuff, they were religious. They were in church every Sunday. And I know she tried to, like, reel it on us, and she does speak about God quite frequently. And I remember, like, telling her certain things, and I know that she moves the same way. Like, she'll say, God's gonna get me through this. Like, I just gotta pray. It's gonna work. I just have to speak to him because, he's listening to me. Initially, that is what I got, right? I got like pray about it or like just talk to him. Like when you're in a dump or when you're down, like you just need to sit down, pray, and always be talking to him. And I don't know, over time, as I started to see the things that were happening in my life, I started to question just that simple fact, right? Like, is he really here? Is he really helping me? Like the things that I'm going through, I should not have to be going through. And they come up with the statements that like God puts his toughest people in like the worst or just the hardest situations. And I don't know. I'm still in the middle, confused in all of those things. But that was in my brain. I was like, that's not going to help me right now. Like I need someone to talk to. And I need someone to understand or like to explain to me like how I can move off from this. And I remember telling her initially, and she was like, you don't need therapy. Obviously, I expressed before, like, that just wasn't the thing. It didn't exist. It wasn't real. And it just started, right? Like, me and her got a good relationship, and I started to have conversations with her. And now she's understood, like, wow, Gemise, like you really do need therapy. And I explained to her and the whole family, like maybe they do need therapy too as well, right? So now I think the conversation, like back then, I feel like it was like what the heck are you talking about? But now it's like, it's become more understanding. I think people are they're opening up their minds more just to have that conversation and just to realize that like it's not something just for crazy people, especially the simple fact that a lot of people just talk about it, right? You have social workers that have therapists, you have teachers that have therapists, it's a whole array of things. Like there are just super like so many things going on that the conversation is just more fluid now. Like people are just spitting it out with no consequences or repercussions or anything of that nature.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think that what's helped was that. Well, I'll start backtrack. I don't know if I've ever been explicitly told that therapy is bad, right? It was never like that. I think it was more like the 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 lack of therapy in my family experience gave me a message. I think you could say, right? So, I had a lot of people in my family, an extended family, who were going through some real issues, mental health issues. Looking back, and what we did instead was go to church and pray about it, light a candle, right? Um, and we'll go into like a family gathering, and we'll do a family prayer. We'll invite a priest, and I'm not gonna say that doesn't help, right? If you really think about it, that could be therapeutic, right? Sense of community, sense of hope, right? All those things are important for like a buffer, to serve as a buffer for mental distress. So I'm not definitely not gonna put that down. And at the same time, I think it's important that the individual goes into therapy and with someone who gets it, not just any therapist, and really dives into their problems, right, and how the person relates to the problems, right. So all that to say that for me, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like they were against it. It was just more like you don't. It was implied that I don't need it. Like I said this in a different podcast, but it was this idea of like, my grandparents didn't go to therapy, my great grandparents didn't go to therapy, my great grandparents didn't go to therapy, my parents didn't go to therapy, they all made it fine, right? But then you got to question what does it mean to be fine, right? Like, I'm not gonna sit here and yeah, sure, they're miracles, like given their context. The fact that they've made it alive and raised their family is a miracle. And I'm always grateful for that. And I understand that they're still dealing with things, right, that they never really process. And the way that impacts the way they relate to other people, right? Like the relational dynamics is impacted. So I don't want to go through that, right? Like I'm grateful, right? And it's a lot for me to learn from their experiences and the resilience. And I can also go to therapy and break some of those walls that I've had, get my better understanding of why I function the way I function, right? Dig deeper, question it, make some changes, experiment with certain behaviors, right? Certain thought patterns, and see how to grow from that, to feel a little lighter, I guess you could say. So I don't know. There's a lot to this. Yeah, but to answer your question, It was never explicitly told to me that it's a bad thing.
All right. With that, we can move on to the next question. Was there a thought or experience you've ever witnessed that may have convinced you that therapy may have never been the answer? And Ramon, you start with this one.
That's a heavy question. Jesus. So when you ask that, you mean like during therapy or before I ever entered?
Before ever entering, during therapy, just any thought over experience that you've seen, you're like, maybe I made the wrong decision.
I don't know about the wrong decision, but there were incidents where I'm like, therapy is not going to solve this, right? I'm thinking like real world issues, right? When I'm thinking about what's happening in Afghanistan, right? Police brutality here, right? Like some like real world issues, right? Just the idea that people could be really fucked up in the positions of power and get to make decisions for our lives. I'm like, there's nothing I can bring up in therapy. There's nothing my therapist can tell me that can fix that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it is. I'm aware of its limitations. And therapy. I mean, as a trainee, becoming a therapist, we're taught this as well, right? Like, we're not going to solve the world's problems in a one-on-one session, right? Sometimes as clients can come in with some insane trauma, right? And you're going to want to help them out, give them the key, the golden key to solve their issues. This is not going to happen, right? The goal, from what opinions can differ, philosophies can differ, but the goal for me as a therapist, serving as a therapist, is to create a relationship, right? To explore together alternatives, right? So what I expect as a client also is not for my therapist to solve the issues of racism, right? For example, is to help me cope with the issues of racism, is to help me build a sense of resiliency, right? What are my options, right? How can I think about myself? What are some small goals I can create for myself? Like, can I support my family with these issues? Can I go to maybe a local government? What are the small steps I can take, right? To create some big issues or big changes. Yeah, and I guess it's a philosophy of like, what can you do? What are you not in control of, and what are you in control of? And then slowly shifting that perspective, right? Because I think a lot of people get stuck when they only focus on the former, right? There's I don't have control. It become like a learned helplessness kind of thing, which is dangerous, and it could lead you to downward spiral. So yeah, so it's a heavy question, but it's something that constantly comes up to me, right? Like, man, what can I do with this client, right? Or what can my therapist tell me right now that's gonna really help me, right? Solve these issues. Like, there are limitations for sure.
Thank you, Ramon. Gemise?
Yeah, it was crazy because initially I didn't have a thought, and then Ramon started talking, and I was like, he's literally taking all the words that I'm thinking about right now. Because I was thinking it's a conversation of like those bigger issues, like they cannot control that situation that's happening, right? But they can address the situation of like how you're feeling. How can we, like, what can we do for you so that you're comfortable and that you're at ease, even though all of this is happening in the world right now? And I was like, he literally just mentioned everything possible, right? It's just the simple fact that, yes, you might see police brutality and it might be bringing you to a point where you're out of it. Like you don't want to do anything. You really want to just be angry, or you want to go do something. And it's like, you ask your therapist, like, what are you going to do about it? Like, they can't do anything about that, but they can definitely ask you, what impact is that having on your health? Like, what impact is that having on you going to work? What impact is that having on you getting out of bed just to take a shower, just to brush your teeth? Like, how is that impacting your life currently, so that we can get you to a point where you're able to just walk outside safely, right? So that you don't have to sit in the house and be afraid to walk down the street without something happening to you. It's those are the questions that I feel like will be, they can address that. It's not those bigger issues though, very unfortunately, but you can't control everything, and the world is always going to have some issue or problem that needs to be dealt with, right?
For sure. That's never going to stop, right?
Nope.
And yeah, you just brought up thoughts in my mind. I think a lot of times we have the issue, right? The big issue that's being brought up in therapy, right? Like, oh, like I'm dealing with the stress of, Trayvon Martin, right? That's one on the news and it's been bombarded all over the news. And yes, it's important to understand it, but to see it over and over and over, it's really bogging me down. Like it's an emotional toll that it has on me, right? And then you start digging deeper as a therapist, and you start thinking like it's not just this, right? It's also the feeling of my voice doesn't matter, right? Our voice doesn't matter as a Black community, right? People of color, because we've been raising these issues forever, and nothing has changed. So my voice doesn't matter. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Does your voice really not matter? Right? Where have you learned this also in your past? And dig deeper into that. Maybe there's a sense of shame with some other issues, right? Shame about your reaction to the event, right? Maybe I shouldn't have reacted this way. Why am I so angry? Dig deeper into that, right? Where have you learned to not be angry, right? And dig deeper into that. Like a lot of these things are multi-dimensional, right? So there's a lot of things we can't control or think about or really, not that we can't think about process. That's essentially the point. But there's a lot of things we can't change about the world. But there's a lot of things we can change about how we relate to the world, right? As Gemise said. So I completely agree with that.
Oh, thank you guys for sharing. With that, we can move on to the next question. Was there anything in your life that provided therapeutic value just enough to keep you going during your low periods? Almost like abstaining from committing to therapy in the long run. I think Jamise, you go the first this time.
Definitely. I'm just thinking, I did a lot of journaling. And honestly, that was the one thing that I did. I had books of papers. I would try to journal every night, whatever I needed to write about that I was feeling or had to vent about, knowing that I couldn't tell anyone or that there was no one to speak to at that time. I would just write. Right. I mean, a lot of it wasn't like me throwing words on a paper. It was very like strategic and in planning. I was like, because I was asking myself questions. I was writing stuff down. And I think a big part of that was just having a book and a pen. Right. I like to write just in general. So it was really helpful to just have that book and that pen to just get through whatever I wanted to get through at that time. When I first started journaling, I didn't know I needed therapy. Right. That wasn't what it was. My mom used to journal and she put it onto me that I should start journaling. And so that was just how it happened. And it really got me through those tough times just because I was able to just, express myself. And also, I just realized that like after a while that sometimes I needed to just have emotional breakdowns. Instead of me bottling stuff up, I needed a point in my life or at a point in my day where I knew I was like, oh, I'm going to cry right now. Like, I just need to let it all out, release it, and then I'm good to go, right? Because I was bottling a lot of things up. So journaling and just having that time to just be emotional, to be vulnerable, was very important.
Thank you,
For
Jamise.
sure. Yeah.
Ramon, you up?
Yeah, that is huge. I try to journal. But to be consistent is tough. So I commend you for that. To ask yourself the critical questions. That is not easy. It is uncomfortable. Yeah. And then the idea of like, letting yourself like just cry and just, there's a metaphor we have of like releasing the valve and just letting the steam out,
Yeah.
which is true. And there's also, I think, probably more important is that you're telling yourself that it's okay for you to be vulnerable, right? To give yourself that space. It's like how you treat your friend, right? When they're crying and you give them support, you're doing that to yourself. I think is very important. But yeah, so it's what you said, and I'm a big believer in some of the physical things you could do for yourself, right? Like jogging is consistently reference aerobic exercise in general. Been consistently shown in studies that has been really good for mood, for what they call the frontal part of your brain, the executive functioning to think clearly.
Yeah.
So that it's like a miracle pill for me. So for example, if I have like a test coming up, the way I react to that, I can almost predict it based on whether I've been jogging the previous week. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So if I have been jogging consistently, I look at it as another task. Like, oh, I got that. Right. I'll think about how I'm gonna break it up into separate parts, blah blah blah. And if I haven't, it feels overwhelming. And it's like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm able to do this. All the questions coming in, the self-doubt. So I always recommend exercise as a way to build your resiliency, to be proactive. Diet also important, right? Like reduce the amount of trash that we eat. And let me not call it trash, right? Like maybe because that also may not be helpful. But there's certain foods that just don't nourish your body the way that other foods do, obviously. And research again is showing the connection between the stomach and the brain, right? And the gut mind connection is super important now. Sleep, my God. We all know it. We all know it. But it's hard to be consistent, right? But
definitely.
Sleep is important. And then I'm just gonna just mention a couple other ones.
Of course,
like social network, right? Like just being connected to friends and family. That is probably going to be number one on my list, honestly. There's that. There's meditation. It's super important to be aware, to separate your thoughts from yourself, to look at your thoughts for what they are, just thoughts, and to acknowledge your emotions. Super important. Let me see what else. For me personally, this is gonna sound kind of funny, but there was a moment where I was just desperate for like answers, right? So I looked into horoscopes. And I'm not a big believer in it. Yeah, I'm not a big believer in it now. But at the time, it was like weird how timely certain messages were, and just exactly what I needed to hear in the moment. So that it was like a bridge for me and my spirituality, in a sense. Like, okay, I think somebody's listening, right? Someone's looking out for me. And yeah, just that connection to like this bigger force, I think it could be very important for a lot of people, right? So I just say spirituality. I'm sure a lot of people would relate to that. Some people look at it through religion. Some people look at it through horoscopes or, gems and stones, right? Like people have their own avenues for that. But I think spirituality, like this larger umbrella term, is really important. So I'm sure there's other things. But for now, I think those are the big ones.
All right. Thank you for sharing. I was just going to bring up, since you mentioned that you were a trainee, if your work does involve mindful awareness and meditation in terms of like their homework they give people, or does it depend on the type of person that you're therapeuting?
Yeah. It's so my work is very I think it depends where you work. Let me start there. It depends where you work. It depends on your philosophy, like the theoretical perspective you have on therapy, because there's a whole bunch. There's cognitive behavioral therapy. There's acceptance and commitment therapy, psychodynamic, dialectical behavior therapy. Like there's a lot of different models, modalities of therapy, and I think some of those therapy models lean in more towards meditation. I personally don't, let's say meditate in the beginning of a session, but I know it can help. And in fact, I've this past week, you're the second person to bring this up. This past week, I've been having conversations about this. Someone told me that they start them at every session with meditation, like a quick meditation before they start, and it's done wonders for them. And a professor of mine said the research supports it too. So that might be something I want to start with. I start doing. So yeah, it depends on the person, but for me, I'm a big believer in meditation. So
gotcha.
Yeah. Right. And as a client, if there's any message that can be taken away from this podcast from me, is for clients, for us, right? Being served in therapy. Be proactive. So there's something you want, ask for it, right? Like it's a collaboration. Like don't come in thinking like, okay, you're the expert, fix me. right? Come in as like it's a team, right? So there's things you've read or heard about from friends, something you saw on IG that you may want to try out, bring it up in therapy, see what they say. And also give, it could be a test on whether you'd be a good fit, right, with your therapist, right? So if meditation is something you want to start with in therapy, bring it up.
All right. Thank you, Ramon. Gemise?
No, you asked him a question about his work.
Oh, no. That was an additional question.
Oh, she started it. She said journaling and
Journaling, yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I got lost in the sauce. We can move on to the next question, which was, walk us through the moment you finally decided to pursue therapy. And the 3 sub-questions were, if you're comfortable sharing, what was the catalyst? Was your financial situation an obstacle? And was there, as you mentioned, Ramon, was there trial and error in finding a therapist? And Ramon, you can start.
Yeah. So for me, this was 2017. It was the summer of 2017. So just to paint the picture, I was working for the Office of Special Programs for CUNY.
Yeah.
I was a research assistant there. And my supervisor left. He got a new job. He was going to move. So he left. His boss, which was like the head of all the special programs, including SEEK and CD, she retired. So I feel like my chain of commands was gone, right? So I didn't know what was next in terms of my job, and not just whether like sense of security, but also like even if I had the security, how much work would be put onto me, right? Given all of this. So that was one piece. And then I got injured working out. I was doing a deadlift and I didn't warm up properly and I messed up my leg. So I had to stop working out, which was like a way for me to, like I said, to build, resiliency, like that mental strength, I guess you can say. So that stopped. And then I was also studying for the GREs to get into graduate school. So it was, a lot was going on in my head. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, what the hell's happening? This was like back to back to back. So I was like, okay, I need a therapist. And I reached out and I did some search on Psychology Today, I think is the website. And what I did was I was looking for a therapist whose like description in their bio seemed like a balance of competence and also warmth. It's hard to describe, but it's really an intuition, honestly. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you these are the exact points, right? Because honestly, it was also the intuition. And luckily, like I did my first session, and it went really great. I was like, okay, I'll go come back again. So I got lucky, I'll be honest. But in terms of finance, I had insurance, so that helped a lot. Yeah. The copay was like $15. Like it was nothing. Yeah, relatively speaking, right? Like it could get really bad. So I got lucky. There weren't that many barriers for me. But I can imagine others, who don't have insurance. That could be a big problem. But there are options out there. And you can negotiate too. I'll say that. Like my third therapist didn't take my insurance, and she was charging like $50. And I asked her whether it could be $10. And she dropped it down, to her credit. She dropped it down to 20.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Negotiate.
Yeah, negotiate, man. Negotiation is so important.
Definitely. Thank you, Ramon. Gemise?
Yep.
Yeah. So this past summer, I was in Teach for America, teaching at this daycare, this Head Start Center, and it was the first 2 years of my teaching experience ever. I honestly just did not enjoy going to work. I hated it. It was just ridiculous. And then this past summer, I finished it and whatnot, And I noticed that constantly for myself, like I keep myself busy on purpose. So I'm preoccupied just so that I don't have to have, that I'm not having the thoughts that I'm always thinking about, because they're revolving. And so what I noticed was that it was happening too frequently while I was on break. Um, this past summer, and it was just back to back, back to back, back to back. Like I couldn't go to sleep. I just wasn't myself. Like it was becoming to a point where like I wasn't even enjoying my break anymore, and I had too much time on my hands. So I remember just saying, I was like, yeah, I need to do therapy. Like it just needs to happen. I was like, I've been dealing with so much these past years, especially these past 2 years, just having to deal with just racism and so many other different things that I probably shouldn't have had to deal with. And I just remember I was like, thankfully, this email came from Teach for America, and they were offering BetterHelp. They were paying for 1 year subscription. And so luckily I was able to sign up and, just go through that process. And before, when I did BetterHelp, they picked a different person, and I was like, I was like, I don't know if this would be a good fit. But then luckily I found the therapist. They assigned the therapist that I have now, and I haven't changed ever since. So finance was an issue because I was like, am I really going to pay $65 a week for this? Like I have bills to pay. I have so many other things that I put money towards, and I'm saving and all these other things, and I'm like, how am I going to pay for it? And then you're right, Ramon, like negotiation is a real thing, because so I know other people that have been in therapy, and like they check for like on Therapy for Black Girls or any other Instagram websites that are like that. And my god sister, she actually negotiated with her therapist. Like they took what is it, Medicaid. They use the specific insurance. They match what your finance situation is, so that you're able to get what you need. So like finding a therapist that cares about you just getting the service, right? They should be able to negotiate, right? Because I'm pretty sure they have people that are paying them $150 just to see them, right? Like they're you paying them $20 is not going to hurt anything that they've got going on, I feel like.
For sure. Don't be afraid to ask. So true.
Definitely. Okay. Word for the day: negotiate. All right. We can move on to the next question. Did you receive any backlash when you've shared your choice with your friends and family? Your choice of actually pursuing therapy?
I haven't received any backlash. I feel like, let me think. I mean, I haven't told, so not a lot, unless you've watched this podcast. That is the only way you would know that I'm in therapy. My obviously, Hamed knows, my mother knows, and I know my sister knows, but my uncle doesn't know, and I speak to him quite frequently. I'm pretty sure I haven't told him yet. And my other siblings don't know as well. Right. So it's a pretty small circle of people that know that I'm actually in therapy. And just for the simple fact that I've just started, and I'm just starting to like just be more open about like me going to it and like the experiences that I've been having. But I have not received any backlash. No one has asked me any like deep defining questions of like, oh, so what's your problem? Or like, what's going on? Like no one has tried to dig deep. They've just been like, how was the experience? And I'm like, oh, it's been pretty well. Like, we've been talking about this. We've been talking about this. I know that like, if I feel like when it becomes a problem is when I know I'm having a conversation with my therapist about someone that I've told that I'm in therapy. Like I'm explaining to them, this is what happened in the session. And I'm like, yeah, so we kind of like talked about you. She told me I should do this just to let you know, just so that you know that you're aware, right?
Right.
And so
She told me to cut you off.
yeah, and so like that's basically when it would become a point where I feel like you would probably either they will push back or like they won't engage in the conversation any further. Because they don't probably want to hear the hard truth, but sometimes it's real, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
very
real. Gotta set boundaries.
I find that to be a very awkward situation if I have to. I mean, obviously, I can choose not to share, but I feel like if somebody's close to me, but there was some type of period of we weren't really vibing, and then I shared that with my therapist, and then how would I bring that up to that person if they do choose to ask me? So that is definitely a situation right there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I never had any backlash or never felt shamed. I mean, I think most of the shame was internal. So I think it's important to acknowledge because I know it's going to happen for a lot of folks who are contemplating going to therapy. There's like maybe some stigma
Yeah.
attached to it, obviously, and that the people who matter to you will understand why, right, and be proud, right. That's kind of the reaction I've gotten. And then I'll flip it back on them, like, okay, why aren't you going to therapy? You're so proud. I was like, okay, what's stopping you?
What's stopping you?
Yeah, yeah. So, two of my family members started going to therapy after, and I like to believe that I played a role in that. I'm sure there's other factors, obviously. But the more we talk about our experiences and normalizing it, I think the better it'll be for others, right? Put in the forefront, planting that seed, like, hey, yeah, it's a normal thing. Just like going to the dentist, just like going to the doctor. It's a mental health checkup, So
I have a side question for you, Ramon. Is it ethical to therapize people you know?
I feel like you know the answer to that question.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, no. Let me elaborate. Like, I feel like people tend to do that anyway. So whether you're a therapist or not, I think not only is it unethical, right? And let me explain why it's unethical. I guess you don't know their life, right? I can act like I know Hamed's history, for example, and assume certain things, and even the things that he tells me, right? I can formulate theories around that. But there's a lot of things that Hamed never tells me, right? Because I'm not his therapist. Two, I have a relationship with Hamed. He's a friend, right? So I'm gonna be biased, right? So there's a lot of thoughts in my head that's gonna impact, the way that I could be objective about his issues. And three, did he ever ask for it? No, he didn't ask my opinion.
Okay. But so even in professionally, it's not promoted or like.
I don't.
Okay, got you.
No. We discourage it.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ramon.
Yeah.
With that, we can move on to the next question. Did you guys get your answers right away, or was the process of therapy more of a slow burn? And Gemise, you can answer.
I can count on my hand how many sessions I've had, and no, my answers have not. My questions have not been answered right away. And she named it for me. Initially, she made me fill out a sheet of all my goals that I wanted to work on. I had my 3 goals that I'm working on, and she explained to me that one of them would take a lot longer. And she knew that I was not in a space to address it because it would just be it wouldn't be a time of reflection. Like, it would be a time of me just still being upset, still feeling that moment. And I need to get to a point where I can have that conversation about that goal, right? And she said that you'll realize that, like, we'll be talking about one thing and you'll be connecting the dots, and we'll just end up talking about that moment and you won't even realize that it's happening right now. And I was like, okay, I see where you're going. And as we have sessions, I'm seeing that, like, there's little pieces to the puzzle that are like coming together, and I'm like, okay, it's gonna come. I can feel it, right? And like, at that point, like, soon enough, I may be at a space where I'm able to talk about it. But we're like working towards it, right? There's no straight answer. It's a whole process. There's a whole technique you'll probably have to be continuing to do for the next 6 weeks just to get yourself at a place where you're able to have those conversations and to just be at a more stable place. So your answer is no, they have not. My questions have not been answered, and it might take years for one of them or 2 of them to be answered, to be quite honest. Or there may not be a specific answer for that goal. It might just be something that I'll just have to continuously manage because I cannot handle the reality of that situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Gemise. Ramon?
Yeah, I'm 100% agreeing with Gemise. So it's and it's interesting. I think we have goals in mind, right? And sometimes there are implicit goals, like some problems that you didn't bring up that come in right? They sneak their way in, and you realize it's such a big issue and it connects with so much, right? And then that gets addressed over time, right? So, like, say, for example, my first therapist, I came in because I was obviously distressed with the GREs and my boss and or my job, I should say, dealing with the injury and like just feeling stressed out, right? So I started with that, and then we started talking about relationships, and then we got into that, and just I'm not gonna say that she solved the relationship issues, but just feeling heard, right? Feeling understood, validating it, right? Like I don't think we acknowledge just how important that is. Because I think, like I said earlier, there's a lot of it has to do with shame, right? And other issues attached to the problems. And therapy is oftentimes just working towards that, like what's attached to it, and then you're able to solve your own issues in a sense. You feel more confident, more resilient. So it's again, like that therapist only did 2 sessions with her because I felt cured in a sense. Big mistake, but it was what I needed at the time because I started off. That was in the summer, and I started off the semester really confident, and I crushed it. Right, my job, like, on top of everything that was happening, the GREs, applying to graduate school, I got in. So I think therapy played a big role with that, and it was only 2 sessions. I wouldn't promise that for anybody, right? I just think I was told and I was validated. I was told what I needed to hear, and I was validated.
All right. Thank you, Ramon. We can move on to the next question after that. Let's see here. I mean, if you guys feel comfortable sharing, did a therapist share an insight with you that impacted a core value you've held? Ramon, you start.
A core value. I don't know about that is. I got to think about that. I can tell you things that my therapists have said that changed fundamentally the way I feel things, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good
and it was honestly, it wasn't even a therapist. It was my supervisor, who served. She was a therapist herself. She was supervising me, serving as a therapist, right? So I was talking about client issues with her, and just the way she framed a certain problem. Like, I was talking about how it's hard for me to feel emotional, right? Because obviously, because of masculinity and being a Latino and what that means. And I told her that I haven't cried in over a decade at that point. And again, I had a therapist who told me, "So what?" Like, when I told her the issue, it's like, "Oh, so what if you haven't cried?" This is the same therapist who microaggressed me. And again, I understand what she was trying to say. Just the execution was not good. Like, if she were to say, "Oh, why is that important for you?" Different question, right?
Yeah, definitely
different route. Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's be curious. But the way she framed it is like, all right, what's going on? So my supervisor, she asked me, or she told me, "Oh, it just sounds like you don't give yourself permission to cry," right? So the idea of giving myself permission was like, what the fuck? Like, I could give myself permission to do things.
Yeah.
So simple, right? But it was so important, and it changed fundamentally how I view so many other issues. It was like a domino effect. And yeah, I'm happy to say that I don't know if you guys heard the Gabriel Fernandez documentary, the child abuse case. I was watching that by myself, and there was a scene about the classroom crying over his death, and I remember my eyes started getting watery. I was like, oh shit, this is happening. And then my first reaction was actually to hold it back. Like, it was like unconscious. I was like, no, hold it back. Like I'm always used to. But then I was like, wait, her voice came in, and it was like, give yourself permission. I was like, you know what? Yeah, let me give myself permission. And it started rolling down my face. I was like, oh shit. And it was like this weird mix of like sadness and also like
Relief.
contentment and relief. Yeah, contentment that I allow myself to cry and like, honor him in a sense, and his pain. So, dude, that it was huge.
That's definitely. I don't know. I feel like for me, with my journey of crying, after I graduated high school, it was just like, I don't know if something changed with me. I'm trying to pinpoint what it was, but it takes like emotional scenes in movies and like people dying that don't deserve to die, and
Yep.
like that can like easily trigger me to cry. And I don't know where that ease of tears came from. Like for me, it's almost like a switch went off after I graduated high school. To this day, I'm still searching as to what changed. So that's
Nice.
definitely
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So
yeah.
you've been gave yourself permission.
Yeah,
It sounds like
yeah.
Yes.
I feel like it's not even permission. It just comes out. I'd be like, oh, it's just a TV show, bro. But yeah, she can go.
That was beautiful, Ramon.
Oh, thank you.
I'm big on just everybody crying. Like crying is fine. Just cry. I love it. I don't know. I enjoy crying. Yeah, it's a sad emotion, but it's beautiful.
It is.
I was thinking, so in my therapy session so far, I know me and her talked a lot about just me being an independent person, and me feeling like I have to be superwoman all the time. I was raised by a single mother, so she did everything. She's been doing everything. And I don't know, a lot of the work that I do and a lot of just the way I move is that I just enjoy doing things by myself, or either I know that I can get it done the way that I want to get it done. So that kind of just has that effect. And I don't know, I think for me, when she started to mention that, like I remember telling her, I was like, I just want to get to a point where I can be independent and manage my own emotions and, whatever trauma or things that I'm dealing with. And she was like, you need like a community to do that, right? Like, yeah, she was like, you need people to help you get through what you're getting through. Like, you cannot do it all alone. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, I'm fucking mind blown. Like you actually right. Like I don't want to do it alone. Like I do want people to be able to help me get through it, or like just to be able to just, have a set community of people around me that are helping me get through what I need to get through, or that are just there for me. And then I was like, oh, okay. She just blew my mind with that one. And then I remember telling her, I was telling her, about family situations and things. Mm-hmm. And she kind of mentioned, she asked me, and she was like, why do you feel like you always have to be superwoman all the time? And I was like, because I know they need me. And she was like, do they need you now? I was like, no, they're good. They got this, they got that. And she was like, so you just answered your own question. I was like, okay. I was like, you see, it's these questions that like, they ask, it just gets you thinking. Like there are certain, like, I don't have to be independent and I don't have to be superwoman. I had been told that like me being independent and not relying on a man or not relying on people in general was something that needed to happen. And I'm trying my way to, ease out of it and not have to do that. But it is something that was a very core tenet to just my parenting that I was going to have, that I was soon going to continue to do. Like that has changed the way that I want to parent. And it also just has changed the way that I just interact at work and the same way that I just interact with my boyfriend. Right. And it's huge. It's crazy that, it came to me at that moment, like just having that simple 30-minute conversation already had that for me, right? Like something that someone could have told me years ago if they had just listened, or they had that kind of like expertise, or just the questions to ask me, really helped me just get to that point where like I don't have to be independent and I don't have to be superwoman all the time. Like I can let my guard down and just kind of like breathe, right? It was huge.
It's amazing, like that domino effect, for real. And I'll add something real quick to that. You mentioned that, I wish I was told that, when I was younger. And I wish I was told, to give myself permission years ago too. And I will also add that for some people though, I think certain context matters, right? So like maybe if they weren't maybe in the space to hear that, right? I think sometimes you kind of have to be validated and heard first and seen, and to sort of open up a bit more and accept emotional changes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not just a thought that changes; it's like the emotion attached to the thought is like was really the issue. So I've trusted my supervisor a lot. Like I trust her intuition, her expertise, the fact that she cares. So when I heard her say that, I was like, okay, I could take her word, and I feel like she understands me in a way that needs that I need to be understood as, right? Like certain perspective. So definitely took her words to heart.
Yeah, the relationship you build and like just the mindset you have, period. Because you are right. I think if I had heard that from someone who was just like, either I know they were out to get me, or like I just knew that their words were just not, they weren't up to par. Like I know I'm up here, like I know you're getting there, but like, are you really sure that that's what you're trying to tell me right now?
Yeah, we'll get a little more defensive.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Like, who the hell are you?
And without being too descriptive for the both of you, and Ramon, you can go first. Do you feel that you've healed from your biggest trauma?
Damn. I guess I'm thinking like, what is my biggest trauma, right? And what does it mean to be healed?
Yeah.
Right. So my initial answer is I don't know.
Okay.
And I would say that healing it's a loaded word. And I think that may also put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right? Because it's not, I don't know if emotional issues are like the same as like a physical issue, right? Like a scar healing and then it never pains you again. I don't know. That's relative. Like I don't know. That's the case, right?
Yeah.
I think what happens is we can look at the issue with a reduced emotional reaction to it, so we can look at it more objectively. So we can look at how our behaviors have been affected because of the trauma, and then work towards changing those behaviors. We can look at how our thoughts have been impacted, like the shame, maybe, the anger, and working towards that. So healing is such a complex, multi-layered word, and what I can say is I'm a very different person than when I was in, let's say, high school or middle school. Right? Like part of that has to do with age, right? The things I've learned, and a big part of it has to do with therapy, self-awareness, and being like intentional about the kind of man that I want to be. So yes, in that sense, I've been healing. It's like ongoing.
Thank you, Ramon and Gemise. You can end this off.
Yeah, I'm glad you like pointed on that word healing. I don't know. No, I have not. I was thinking like if I had accepted the trauma, right? Have I come to an understanding not only for myself but for the person that has, did what they did to me? Like am I at a place where I'm not angry anymore every time I think about it, or like my blood isn't boiling, or like can I talk about that situation in a way that makes me feel comfortable or makes me feel safe still? And no, I'm not at that point. I'm very far from it. I'm still in the very early stages, and I don't know. I guess like that's where I'm looking at it at this point. Like I know I won't be healed. Like though they're not physical wounds, but it's still there. Like it's in my brain, it's in my thoughts. I do have memories, right? They're still there. They're not going anywhere. And I think a big part of that is the simple fact that am I kind of able to get to a point where I can talk to that person and be at a space where I'm like, I don't hate you, right? Like I understand why you may have done some of the things you did. And I'm naming my own emotions. Like this is how it made me feel. Just at least to have a conversation where there's neutrality, right? I'm in a neutral space and it's okay. Like I know that has happened, but now I'm in the present moment, right? I don't want to think about that moment anymore. I just want to be in a space where I can, just talk to you.
Definitely. And with that, that was the last question of the podcast. Thank you very much, Ramon, for participating in your busy schedule.
Dude,
And
thank you for inviting me, man.
yeah, of
This is an
course,
awesome
anytime.
convo.
Definitely, definitely. And we're
Yeah,
thinking of having a part two. So because we didn't have a lot of people, but I feel like these questions are important to ask anybody and everybody.
yeah,
I just want to thank you, and yeah, from now, see you in the next episode.
sounds good. Thank you so much, Ahmed and Jamise. Nice
No
meeting you, by the way.
problem. See you later,
You
Ramon.
too.
All right, have a good one.